good friend, genius. He's going to give a presentation with a comprehensible title. What is it, Mike?
It says, Bridging Diversities, Creating Personhood Through Dialectical Engagement.
So there you are. I'll hand you over to the good man.
Thank you so much. Thank you. In just a moment, I'm going to come over there and talk. If they can fix the mic, then that's fine. But I should be able to speak loudly enough. Before I do that, just let me say how honored and humbled I am to be here, especially when there are so many people in this room that I respect so deeply and who are much more qualified to be up here than I am, and so I appreciate that. I want to thank Richard Casebo. Richard, thank you. I'm sure that you are happy because this conference is going very, very well and it's full of rich discussion. I want to thank Dorota for having me here and for inviting that lovely speaker the other day. And I'd like to thank Harry for indulging me and asking me to come here. I don't know if you know it, but after Richard had to back off a little bit, Harry did an awful lot of work here. He just worked very, very hard behind the scenes. Just one example, if you look in your program and you find Debbie Yankowicz's name and you put your finger over his name, you'll find that there was something that's pasted there. His name was wrong. A normal person would have put out a flyer, but he went in there and asked people to help and put in little stickers in every single one of them. So thank you, Harry, for all the work you did for us.
OCD.
OCD. Okay. So this is what I would like us to understand by the time we're done. I don't expect that will be hard to understand soon because we're personal construct folks. I'm going to move forward. If I speak too quickly, please stop me, if you will. Because I'm an American and my ugly Americanness may make me speak too quickly, but I will try to speak more slowly. So here's the problem. The problem is we are living in a changing, fragmented world, a postmodern global world in which our encounters with difference lead us to question who we are and what we believe. I have had an interest in conflict management and conflict resolution for 20 years. I teach a course in it for my students. I use it in my life. I do some coaching in which I coach people in conflict management. It's been a latent thing in my mind for a long time. But I must say that, like many, the events of the last 2 years have mobilized me. The election of 2016 in the United States, the enormous polarization that I see between and among people, the sad state of the world has really moved me to want to do something better, to want to find a way to get us to bridge our divides in ways that are actually possible and not Pollyannish. That's what I'm going to try to talk about, and we'll see how well I do. Do I need it? I think I do. If you tell me I need it, with that tone of voice. Is that it?
Oh, that sounds bad.
Can you hear me? Is this better?
Is it better? Yeah.
You know, I don't feel like it. I swear. Okay, good. All right. Can you hear me? Yeah. That's good. Okay. All right. So the question: in our postmodern, fragmented world, what does it mean to be a person in this world? How do we define ourselves? And most important,
how is it possible to reconcile our differences? Some recent history. Intellectual history. Well, in the 20th century, we started with modernism. And in modernism, we had a lot of certainty, a lot of faith in the future. We had an idea that science would bring us certainty, that our categories are mirrors of nature. We simply have to look at the world and we see what is real. We had a faith in individual reason and rationality, that the mind is going to be able to think logically in a certain universal way. We had a belief in a narrative of progress that led some people to speak of the end of history, and we had a kind of a belief in cognitive and moral universalism that was possible. Of course, not everyone believes it. These are idealizations, as is everything I'm going to be speaking about. Postmodernism comes in, and we begin to question these certainties that we have. We have doubts. The knower participates in the know. That our frames, our constructs, etc., are going to determine how we understand the world, as much as the world, our experience of it is. Whether that is an individual construction or a social construction, where we're coordinating our constructive processes together. In any case, we have this idea that the knower participates in the known, and that our categories structure our understanding of the world. And this leads us to a crisis of certainty. And postmodernism arises with a rejection of traditional modes of authority and power, with rejection of scientific certainty, a rejection of grand narratives, whether those grand narratives come from religion, the state, or the science. Rejection of the trajectory of progress, and even a rejection of the centrality of rationality in the individual mind. In favor of eliminating, exposing power and power differentials and how power leads to certain ways of knowing to be constructed. Instead of scientific certainty, we get perspectivism. Instead of grand narratives, we get multiculturalism and a clash of narratives. And this is where our sense of who I am begins to be called into question. Instead of a trajectory of progress, we get a trajectory of difference. We're going in many directions, not one. And a decentralization of self. And it's what leads Richard Schwader to speak of the postmodern condition in terms of the philosophy of Confucianism, which is not to be the same as Confucianism. They're different. And what Confucianism is, according to him, is the idea that the knowable world is incomplete if it's viewed from any single perspective, incoherent when viewed from all perspectives, and empty if viewed from no perspective. Where does that leave us? It leaves Schwader with a pluralism, accepting the pluralism of perspectives. What else do we've got? What other things divide us? Well, as I said before, we've got some economic and geopolitical realities that are causing great polarization and a clash of identity. There's one of them, right there. We have massive inequality, which leads to war, which leads to refugees, which leads to refugee camps. We have the dark percentage there. Those are the number of, that's the darker you have, the more poverty you have. You have climate change. You have climate change denials. You have Brexit. Okay? We are divided. So, that's my first part. That's where we're at. I want to talk a little bit now about, I'm going to shift a little bit. I'm going to shift in several ways, and it's all, hopefully, will come together in the end in a nice way. And and you'll be the judge of whether that happens or not, of course. In this postmodern world, I want to talk a little bit about what I call contradictions of postmodern individualism. Now, these contradictions are largely going on in the United States. For me, I don't know if they're going on in other places. I believe that they are. And that they are going on both on the left and the right of the political spectrum. But I am more interested in the left of the political spectrum. I'm more interested in challenging my colleagues and my compatriots on the left where I am. And so what I'm going to be talking about is the concept of individualism that I think has arisen in the past 50 or 60 years that has become dangerous, in my opinion, even though it is noble and forward-moving. So, the Western concept of the individual, what I'm going to be talking about, is a political concept, which is an interesting thing to do when we're talking at a psychological conference. This is a psychological conference. Shouldn't I be talking about psychological conceptions of the individual? Well, yes, except our psychological conception of the individual has an awful lot to do with John Locke and the history of Western individualism that comes from historical and material conditions that we are dealing with at the beginning of the 18th century. And that's changed over time. When we began in the States, the founding principles of Western individualism were liberty, freedom. A certain type of freedom. Freedom from arbitrary authority. Leave me alone so I can pursue my own religion. The rights, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, Jefferson. Okay? And these freedoms, I want to argue, at this point, at least in intellectual history, were accompanied by a wide range of moral values, a rich moral tradition, which included rights tethered to responsibilities, which includes rights constrained and filtered through religion, whether or not you are religious or not. I'm an atheist, but nonetheless, that religion provided people with a way to understand their individuality. Community standards, civic virtue, all of these moral frames were there, if you will, to give meaning to the individual and to keep freedom from turning into license. And no other figure than Adam Smith, the Wealth of Nations, okay, came up with the theory of moral sentiments, in which he argued that a capitalist society required virtue, prudence, character, and beneficence. This is Adam Smith arguing that you must have fellow feeling, that was his term, compassion, etc., in order for a capitalist society to work. And that was the assumptions at that point. For better and for worse, because we know that these assumptions were not ubiquitous and distributed to all peoples. Now, this is what I want to argue, along with Jonathan Haidt, who talks about the great narrowing of morality in the 20th century. The great narrowing, at least in the West. Whereas we had this enormous, wide range of moral categories, they have become narrow to include primarily rights, justice, and welfare, social welfare, in the West, in our way of thinking. And what I want to argue is that this rich tradition, where everything was kind of connected, at least intellectually, has changed. And that what has happened is, because of the proper and appropriate questioning of authority that occurred in the 1960s and throughout American history, again, I'm speaking about American history, that virtue and character, with the rise of individualism, with the rise of the ethos of individual rights, that we get a severing of the individual from ideas of virtue and character, from responsibility, if you will, and from an ethos of care, where there was a rich communitarian tradition. With the rise of individuality, I'm suggesting, along with Charles Taylor, that these things have become splintered. And what we have now is we have individual rights as the primary. It's absolutely necessary. Rights are absolutely necessary. What I'm going to argue is I don't think they're sufficient. Rights are absolutely necessary. But if it devolves to that being the only category, we get individual rights. We get group rights. Good thing. We also get corporate rights in the United States. Corporations are seen as people and as individuals. Now, there's problems here. Because what we're getting is, in my opinion, when you begin to sever the individual from a larger moral framework, you get what at least I'm experiencing as a kind of a personal morality. Everybody has a kind of a personal morality. But a personal morality, I want to argue, is a contradiction in terms. There is no such thing, and can be no such thing, as a personal morality. We can't all have our own morality. It is social and relational from the start. So what we have, I'm suggesting, is a concept of rights that is divorced from these other values and traditions, where the latter exist, but they're seen as largely as matters of personal choice. You can care about somebody else if you want to, but you don't have to. Whereas before, religion might have been in there saying, you better do that. You can have obligations to others, but you don't have to. What's really important is that you have your life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Tolerance and respect for diversity become central and important goals. All good, except what happens when we have a rights-based ideal only? Well, respect and tolerance for diversity become important goals, important ends. Although there are differences, we are all equal, and we are all should tolerate and respect each other. The goal of multiculturalism, for example. Live and let live. What could be more obvious and good? Here it is. So all groups are equal. Jews, whites, Africans, African Americans, Asians, Hispanics, we're all equal. And everybody's ideology, if you will, is equal and should be treated with respect. Christians and Jews, Muslims and Hindus, transgender, men, women, gays, socialists, conservatives, well, maybe not the socialists, but socialists and conservatives, and liberals and libertarians, we're all equal, and we all should have a voice. Live and let live. If only we would do that, we'd all be okay. If only everybody would think this way, but everybody doesn't. What happens, even if we try to think this way, what happens when working class whites begin to resent African Americans for taking their place in the social structure? But whether it is true or not true, they feel it and they experience it. What happens then? What happens when those same working class whites resent Hispanics for speaking Spanish in English America? We don't have a tradition of multiple languages. This causes great strife. What happens when working class whites feel dissed by people like me? White, middle-class, liberal intellectuals who, when they complain about Hispanics or African Americans or gays, we call them racist and sexist and the rest, and they begin to become resentful that they're being marginalized themselves. What do we say? We say, oh, no, you had yours, now it's time for mine, and you're bad. When that happens, we get the election of 2016. That's what happened. What happens when we have transgender men, women, and gays, and we want to see them as all equal? Well, what happens on the left when a transgender, a man named Bruce Jenner, okay, Olympic athlete, gold medalist, moves from male to female and claims the identity of woman? What happens at that point? What happens when women begin to say, wait a minute, you were a male athlete with all the privileges that come with that, and now you're going to say that you're a female and claim the same identity as me? That's a conflict. That's a conflict. It doesn't sit benignly, even on the left. What do we do about that? What happens when our liberal sensibilities say we want to treat all equally, and then we say we want to treat gays as the same as LGBTQ as the same as cisgender, when at the same time you have cultures that don't do that. We want to value culture on the one hand, and then sexual orientation on the other hand. They come into conflict. We have a problem. We have a problem here. And that's the outcome. Deep polarization and intractable conflict. People can't speak to each other. People defriend each other on Facebook, the worst form of communication to begin with. You know, we get that. So what I want to argue is that the contradiction of modern liberalism, and this may be uncomfortable, the dismantling of traditional authority corrected many wrongdoings of Western individuals. Slavery, women's rights, gay rights, the rest. But it also weakened sources of selfhood. It also weakened the very institutions from which individuals were able to cultivate a self and define a self. Now, you can say that those institutions were bad. Fine. That's fine. I agree. We haven't replaced them with anything. Maybe they're irreplaceable. But this is part of the problem. And as a result, in my opinion, we retreat into empty individualism. It's just me. I look inside of myself for my identity, but there's no identity inside myself. My identity is always a relational process of identifying with some system of the good. We retreat into tribalism. We retreat into corporatism. And we get polarization increasing, and the democratic institutions begin to become distorted and fail. When a billionaire can fund his own campaign, a billionaire, and it trumps the entire population's money, he's able to do something for himself. Somehow, that democratic institutions are failing now. And we enter, arguably, in a state that I would want to call cultural Hobbesianism. Okay? Whereas in nature, Hobbes said, life is short, brutal, nasty, because we're all one person against another. It's as if now what we are is one identity group against the other, one individual in a culture, one cultural individual against the other, without a way to transcend those differences. So, the question becomes, can we bridge our divides? And I want to say, I think the answer is maybe. In a very difficult and really uncomfortable way. Resolving conflict through radical sociology and dialectical problem solves. And the words there, sociality and dialectical, are very important. Because what I'm suggesting is something really, really difficult. And that, namely, can you look for the radical sociology? Kelly ruined me with that notion of sociality. Kelly ruined me with the idea that you always have to look at it from the other person's point of view. Because when I do that, and I see that the other person is acting on the basis of meaning, I cannot castigate that person in the same way as I would otherwise. As I'd love to be able to do it, but I can't. Radical sociality. So, I'm going to unpack this in a series of stages. Start with dialectical problem solving. It comes from three traditions. One, constructivism and social constructivism. Two, conflict management theory. And three, dialectical thinking, Hegel, Marx, and Kelly. Kelly's a dialectical thinking with respect to the dichotomous conflict constructs. How many psychological theories have this notion of the dialectic in it? Let's start with constructivist assumptions, the one that people act on the basis of their meaning systems, the one that destroyed me. Constructive alternativism, if If we act on the basis of our constructed meanings, they are changeable. Dialectics, dichotomies, the fragmentation of selfhood and conflict. We have fragmented beliefs in us, including beliefs that we won't recognize are there. Sociality and choice. Start with these ideas. I'm not going to say anything more about it. Some basics of the conflict resolution process that I want to work through. Okay, how do we ordinarily think about conflict? We think about it as a zero-sum game. We have this sport in the United States. It's called football. It's not real football. You play real football. We play this disgusting macho game in which big people, are trying to move a ball from one side of the field to another. And in doing so, what they do is people actually lose ground and gain ground. You see? That the only way I win is if you lose. And this is what we do in a debate. We say in a debate, oh, let's find common ground. Oh, I gained ground. I lost ground. All right? It's a battle. He shot down my argument. Okay? He shot down my argument. I need more ammunition in this. I'm in a battle with you. And so a zero-sum game is how we usually think about a conflict, and it's what we think about in a debate. In a debate, we have positions. Well, in a football team, you have positions, right? There are positions, right? So we position ourselves in a battlefield. And so she takes the position, America first. Immigrants are taking our resources. He comes back with a counter position. Immigrants do the jobs we don't want to do. Let them stay around. And they conflict. And then she says another position, he says another position, and it goes back and forth until that happens. When was the last time you were convinced by somebody in a debate? Oh my goodness, you're right. I'm going to come over to your side. It doesn't happen. It never happens. It very rarely happens. Okay? Yet this is our primary way of dealing with conflict. Democracy is the best form of government, except for all the other ones that have been tried from time to time. And it is. It's the best form of government, except for all the other ones. It's the worst form. Did I say best? Churchill said that democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the other ones that have been tried from time to time. I screwed up the joke. And it's true. It's slow. It's inefficient. But at least we don't kill each other. Well, now we're beginning to have some problems. In a debate, positions are typically one person's solution to a problem of meeting some unmet need. In a debate, when we take positions, those are solutions to a problem that we haven't even identified. This is basic conflict resolution stuff. A position in a debate is a solution to a problem. It's a solution to an unmet and unidentified need. So America first, immigrants are taking our resources. What's the need? I'm afraid that my way of life is going to be destroyed. Immigrants do the jobs we don't want to do. Let's keep them around. I want to help people flee from difficult situations. My grandparents came here from Italy. I want to perpetuate that. These are the real things, and these are the ones that are hard to get to. What's underneath the position is an unmet need or feeling. So if you can look at the position of the other, here's radical sociology right here. Find the unmet need. Find the unmet need. Find the unmet need. And when you find the unmet need, bring those needs to the surface. Get rid of the positions. Get rid of the positions. Forget rationality. Don't try to convince. We do it all the time. I'm trying to convince, try to convince, try to convince. Don't try to convince. Attend to the emotions and the needs. That the conflict resolution is primarily an emotion, an identity-based process, not a process of rationality and logical reasoning. Oh, you are being irrational. No, Kelly will say, look at the media system. Radical sociality. And when I say radical sociality, here's why it's uncomfortable. I mean radical sociality with Trump supporters. I mean radical sociality with Sanders supporters. I mean radical sociality with racists. I mean radical sociality with sexists. That's what I mean. And I'm serious about it. There's a guy named Daryl Davis. He's a black blues singer. He's playing his piano. A white supremacist comes up to him. They begin to talk about Jerry Lee Lewis. Daryl Davis begins to engage this person. They become friends. This guy's in the KKK. This is true. They become friends. Davis never challenges them. Simply tries to understand over time. Over time. Engages in some of the principles that I'm talking about here. What happens eventually, not always, but with this guy and several others, they become transformed. They give up their robes. They give up their membership in the KKK. They give him their robes when they find out, oh, he's a person. This is basic stuff. We know what gets rid of prejudice. We know it. It is taking people of different backgrounds, putting them together, if you can, in a situation where they must collaborate on some goal, and then they realize that they're human. We know this already, yet we don't act on it, I say. So, identify each need. Find the real need. I'm afraid that my way of life is going to be destroyed, and come up with possible solutions. I want to help people fleeing difficult situations, and then come up with some synthesis that resolves the conflict, but meets both sets of needs and meet them at the same time without giving in. You don't give in. Your needs are inviolate. How does that happen? Through dialectical problem solving. Okay, next one, big spread. The synthesis of opposites. Again, back to Kelly. That says thesis. Thesis, okay? This is Hegel, this is Marx. You start with a thesis, that generates its opposite, the antithesis. Okay? They are in conflict. And through additional work, you can synthesize the thesis and the antithesis into a synthesis that resolves the contradiction. I will come back to that in a minute. It's very important. So you have a thesis. It generates its antithesis. Then that antithesis generates change in the thesis, which generates change in the antithesis, which can be put together into a new synthesis. A common example to illustrate the process. Nature, nurture. Nature determines development, thesis. Nurture determines development, antithesis. Well, I'll show you that nature determines development. Genes determine the physical structure of the body. Birds, when they begin right when they're born, they recognize their mother's call. It's innate. Oh, wait a minute. The environment of the gene affects the expression of the gene. Oh, wait a minute. The bird's call is affected by the prior experience. The bird has to hear either its own voice or a mother's voice in order to recognize the call. In utero. Oh, okay. Now we have a synthesis, epigenesis, which is the idea that genes and environment are inseparable processes and that they affect each other. And if they affect each other, the controversy is over. It need not ever be risen again, although it's still there in a lot of places. Okay? That's an example of a dialectical synthesis. When we're talking about such a process in conflict resolution processes, when you're tending to the plea, and I mean this, attend to the plea behind the position you hate. So somebody takes a position you hate, and I'm suggesting, can you find the plea underneath that? The need, the fear, the humanity beneath that. Resist the natural and overwhelming urge to reject the other. Seek out the most difficult thing to do, the not me. Bracket your own inviolate needs. They are inviolate. Don't give them up. But understand the plea behind the position you take. And is compassion possible at that point? I don't know, but it could be. Let me move forward. Now, when you're engaged in conflict, these conflicts aren't simple. I just gave you a simple conflict. Epigenesis, it took 200 years to resolve it. Conflicts aren't simple. Conflicts between people are not simple. They are embedded in multiple levels. So, for example, here we go. In any conflict management process, how do you hear the position behind the plea behind the position you hate? First, you've got to make people feel safe. You've got to honor their dignity. You have to honor the dignity of the sexist. You have to honor the dignity of the racist. You have to honor the dignity of Kim Jong-un. Okay? When Trump was going to meet with Kim, America, somewhere in the government, they put out, I showed you before, it's a coin. And on this coin, they have a picture of Trump and Kim facing each other. Okay? First of all, it's a bizarre thing to do in any case, but they did this. It caused a great stir in the United States. Do you know why? Because Trump and Kim were portrayed as equals. Okay? And the complaint was, you can't treat Kim as an equal to you. No, you're giving away the store. You're giving away the store. No, the first principle of conflict resolution is you must honor the dignity of the other. And the whole point is that that's where you start. You must start with the dignity of the other, or else you're never going to get anywhere. Safety first. Then, simple baby steps. Can you coordinate proximal needs? What is your need in this particular situation? What is your need in this particular situation between a black man and a white police officer? Then, constructing joint ideologies and joint group identities. All of these processes are embedded in layers and layers and layers of meaning and identity that must be dealt with piecemeal and fragmentation until you get something bigger, I argue. So, for example, start off with safety and dignity. Identify unmet needs. Look what happens. So I see your need, you see my need. We come up with solutions that meet both needs. We move on after 3 years. We start to deal with each other's identities and their ideologies. What's your ideology, Kim? What's your ideology, Trump? What's your ideology, Kim? What's your ideology, reasonable other person? Let's get rid of the Trump. And then we do the same thing. Here's belief 1. Clashes with belief 2. Well, let's come up with new beliefs that we haven't thought of before to synthesize a new ideology. 50 years later, maybe we begin to mutually transform each other's joint identities in relation to each other. I believe there's no other way. It's slow, but it's the only way. I believe. So, let's give an example. So, United States, you got this. You got white police officers shooting black men. You got the Black Lives Matter movement. And what do you get in response? Police lives matter. Okay? And what happens? They're fighting back and forth. You get Black Lives Matter. The next phrase is all lives matter. Now we go back for blacks, black, all black. No, okay. Continue the friggin' conversation. Black lives matter, all lives matter. Well, we've been treated as if black lives don't matter. Well, we've been treated as if Italian matters don't matter. Well, that's good, so we both have pain. Okay? Does one pain trump another pain? No, we can begin to have a conversation, but not if it stops here. So, what are the positions? Black lives matter. Police are killing black men without reason. White male supremacy is the culprit. Got that from a quote from a website about Black Lives Matter. Systemic racism puts black men in jail. I don't know about you. I'm a privileged white man, but damn it, I don't like it to be told white male supremacy is the culprit. I don't like being put in that category. My dander is up immediately. The black police killings should be hate crimes. Police incarcerate only those who break the rules. Police follow strict rules. Those are positions. This is not what we should be arguing over. We should not be dealing with those. We got to get rid of those positions. Go to the unmet needs. And when you do that, something different happens. Start with safety. We start with safety. You put the cop and the black man together. First and foremost, safety. You got to get trust. First, you have a dinner. I don't know what you do. I respect you. I respect your concerns first. I respect you. I respect your concerns first. After a long period of that, only then can you begin to address proximal needs. So how do you get at needs? Each person tells their story. They tell their story. Multiple stories in a safe, therapeutic environment. You know what I'm talking about because you're clinicians. What are the needs? The cop wants to protect himself from harm. The cop wants to protect herself from harm. They want respect because of their status. They want to enforce the law. These are not hard things to understand. That's the reason they take the positions they take. The black man wants to be safe because whenever I walk down the street, someone's looking at me as if I'm going to do something wrong. They want respect, but a different type of respect. The cop wants respect because of his status. The black man wants respect because he's been constantly humiliated. He wants to reverse his powerlessness. That's why I walk in a certain way, perhaps, to flaunt my control or my power to you when I see you. That's what's got to be dealt with head on, but we don't do it. So when we get the needs and the feelings, we put them on the table after a year of this. Well, how do I get status? Well, maybe if I express respectful intentions when I stop someone, I stop immediately. I'm just making this up. The cop stops someone, immediately says his respectful intentions. I respect what you're doing right here. I have to perform this job. Making this up. Greets people on the street might be a way to deal with respect for the black man. Well, maybe the black man begins to say, well, if you can do that, I can comply with legitimate requests. Raise the question of what legitimate is. I can address the police officer as sir, rather than epithets or what have you. Slow. Proximal needs. So they come up with respectful routines, really stupid, dumb little routines that might start things off. And then the process iterates. You get another need, and it goes. Only after a long period of time can you begin to construct joint ideologies. Take a look. Here's the ideology. An ideology of white lives matter, black lives matter. There is a culture of white male supremacy. This comes from mainstream websites. Racism is a system of advantage based on race. I embrace that definition entirely. Power is unjustly distributed. Yes, black lives have not mattered as much as white lives in history, which clashes with no other group of professionals outside of the military sustained serious injury and death like police officers. Peace officers, quote from the website, peace officers, one person's police officer, one person's, can't think of a word, is another person's peace officer. One person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. Peace officers serve selflessly, this is a quote, from their communities to protect every classification of person, even as they are maligned. That's the ideology. Well, let's put those together. Now, here's the point I want to make. This is radical sociality. This is radical sociality. What truth is there in the other? However distorted, however much you have to squint to see it, however much you have to reach in there and reach really far to find some truth. What's truth in there? What's the truth in there? What truth can I begin to see in what you're saying? And maybe we can begin to construct a shared ideology. Systems of power and advantage based on race. Police have power but are killed and injured at higher rates. Boom. All right? That takes time if it could happen. But that's not nothing. That's not nothing. That's a shared idea. That's a belief. Now, there's other stuff that is not in there. This guy still believes in white male supremacy, that police often abuse power, that rules of police action enable the killing. This guy believes that police are unjustly maligned. We must protect ourselves. Criminals are appropriately incarcerated. We still got disagreements, but maybe that disagreements could come with even further if we focus on the needs, unmet needs, without the positions. To do that, you must still recognize, I suggest, that these needs themselves are embedded and structured by meanings and identities and infrastructures. So you gotta go slowly. And at some point, maybe you could even begin to have a collective identity that, at least in part, that brings the two together. Hey, he has no arms. I don't think that was intentional. Okay. So the rule here is that fragmented, uneven, peaceful development in fits and starts counts. Every act of goodness can beget. Goodness begets goodness, begets goodness, begets goodness, and it takes time. So, I believe that's a path. It's an idealization, to be sure. There are examples of it happening. I was so moved with the first speaker the other day. If someone were to tell me that a government would try to identify an ideology based upon principles of care and relationship, I would have told you no. And I was just stunned by that. Humans are symbol-using animals capable of engaging in shared intentionality with others. Symbol-using animals means we act on the basis of constructed meanings. We take those meanings as reality. But we're symbol-using animals. We can change those symbols. We can change those meanings through constructive alternativism. But it has to be done in relationships. It has to be done in relationships in which we acknowledge the full meaning and humanity of the other without giving ourselves away. If we can think of ourselves as open-ended, symbol-using animals who I seek out the other and am not threatened by it in some way, and I'm willing to open myself to the other, even to as I open myself to the other, particularly the humanity of the other, that which lies beneath the position I hate, I think that's a new way of being in the world that is different from what I've called this encased individualism, this cultural Hobbesianism, this my identity against yours, that myself against yours. It's the best I can do. Maybe you can do better. Thank you for listening. Feedback will be gratefully received.
Thank you so much, Mike. I've often said that human beings always have to learn the hard way. I think mics put a bit of flesh on those bones. So we've got culture now for discussion.
That's great. May I ask, may I just say that I'm happy to answer questions. I would value more a discussion. I would like to hear more what you have to say, what you think, rather than simply asking me drawing out more. So, you want to call people?
Is there a microphone I might use maybe?
Oh, there's a handheld one, that would be good.
Can everybody hear me?
Everybody can really
Okay,
hear you.
wonderful. Now, thank you for extremely relevant, timely, moving, well thought out, and insert laudatory adjective at will presentation. And there's so much that you made me think about. And one thing, I'll start in no particular order. And one thing is that in order to enter a process of mediation, both parties need to be willing to enter that process. And in my experience, that is the first hurdle. So how do you make both parties willing to enter this process?
Can I answer?
Yeah, I would like you to.
Many years ago, when I was brought to court in a nasty custody battle, I had to pay for it. And so I became a web designer and all types of things that I wasn't in order to make money. And one of the things I became was a life coach, in which I was coaching couples, and I saw this thing, these ads that say, repair your relationship, even if your partner isn't willing. So I put that up there, as a way to, and I began to think about how that might actually happen, and I believe it could happen, even though that was I didn't do it I did it for life-saving reasons. I needed money, okay? But the point is, that's what Daryl Davis did. So how do I get you to do it? I'm in a relationship with my wife, and I'm always berating my wife. And my wife, I say to my wife, oh my goodness, why did you do it that way? And she'd come back with some negative response. But instead she says to me, oh dear, it seems as though your need for X is not being met. And I say, what? And then little by little by little, through each act of me identifying your need and putting my stuff aside, which is the hardest thing in the world to do, with each act of me looking beneath and finding that plea in you and honoring that plea, I begin to disarm you. And as I disarm you, you're ready to listen to me, and we can begin to get into a dialogue slowly. I don't know any other way. But I think you had her.
Excuse me. Your point about friendship rang bells with me, because when I think of examples in my own experience of this process, I realize how much time it can take. An Arab friend, myself against my brother and myself against my cousin, myself, my brother, my cousin against the world. And I put myself into that person's shoes. What wonderful strength the family that is based on. Okay. And then it takes a little time, and I speak to him about, well, how does he relate to his mother? Do you think of your mother in the same way as the Westerners think of the mother as the core, central person? Do you respect her? Well, actually, no, Debbie, she's a woman. Well, my father's. That's going to take a little bit of time. And it seems to me that if I walk away from that situation, I've lost the opportunity to create a friendship, which you identified earlier as the mechanism which allows us to drop our defenses and to move towards each other. Time and friendship.
I have nothing to say to that. What can I add to that? That's wonderful.
When Carmen has asked you this question, I had a strong urge to answer. So my answer would not be personal, but from personal history of our nation. So we had a different opinion about the way we run our country with Americans. So they thought we should run it in the different way. And it was a process which lasted about a year or two. And the way to put people on the table, in this case, was to bomb us.
Sorry?
Was to bomb us. So literally, American forces were bombing the ideas in our heads. And then people sat at the table. So it's very difficult to realize that this bombing was not done under the power of Trump, but under the power of Clinton, who is Democrat. So I think that, again, we have a sort of a centricity here, because there are different countries with different problems, and they all have the same problem. Habermas did his beautiful theory about conversation and practice in communication. And he wrote many volumes on that, except that he hasn't answered to this question, which Carmen eventually posed. So the problem is that doing it very slowly is perhaps okay on an individual basis, but it doesn't work on a group level so easy. The only way I have found in psychological literature so far was a work by Muzaffer Sherif, a social psychologist you probably know, who was working with these scouts in America, and he said the only way you can put together two groups which are in conflict to collaborate is to find them a new joint enemy. The third group, which will be against the first two. So I'm afraid that we still cannot live without enemies, because this is a true dialectic. If you want to understand, you also have to allow the other pole.
Wow. Wow. Am I understanding you correctly? Are you, first of all, let me say that good things, any act produces or can produce good things and bad things. My kind act toward you can produce a good thing, it can produce a bad thing, like we talked about yesterday. Unintended bad things come from good acts. War produces bad things. Good things sometimes come out of war. But am I understanding you to say that the bombing was a necessary and good thing in order to bring the people into collaboration?
No, I said that this is what happens when your communicative strategy are exhausted. We had Marty Ahtisaari, we had Lord Carrington, we had many peoples coming to Serbia about our conflict, and they were talking and talking and talking. And this very slow, mediative process was exhausted in one sentence when Marty Ahtisaari said to our leader, if you don't listen to what we offer, the Belgrade will be just flat as this table. Mm-hmm. So at the end of the power relationship, you can only resort to physical force, which destroys.
Right.
So it is a question of interest, I would say.
I don't want to suggest that all conflicts are resolvable. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is probably not resolvable in a win-win way. They both want the same land. It can only be resolved in a compromise at best. What I'm talking about here are not compromises. They are win-win solutions. Not all conflicts can be solved that way. War should be the last resort, the last resort, my God. But I must insist that this sort of thing is often not tried. I asked Paul, we had a conversation, and I asked Paul in Northern Ireland, because I don't know what goes on in these interactions. But if it's a matter of me offering you something for you and we're going to barter back and forth, that's the old model. That's the old model. I'm saying find the need of the other and try to meet that need. And you'll often find that the needs are not incompatible with each other. Often, not always. So I asked Paul, when they're engaging in this negotiation in Northern Ireland, are they doing this sort of thing, identifying the need? He said no. Now, I can let you speak for yourself, but he said that it's more of this kind of back and forthness. I'm going to offer something, you're going to offer something. That's not good.
But you see, you don't answer the main question: in whose interest this mediation is?
Both parties. That's what I'm offering to you. I'm offering to you the idea that
I'm just trying to say that maybe a third realm,
yes,
which is being invested in this. We are making a new class of people, psychotherapists, mediators, the rulers of the world, to make rich people even more rich. And I will not shoot at you. Mm-hmm. You will not steal from me. Mm-hmm. But we will go to mediator in his office. Mm-hmm. And there will be the whole new Bill of Rights, the whole new language.
Which will generate another antithesis.
A lovely political correctness. And it will...
Did you hear any political correctness in what I'm saying?
Hang on. It will be. But it will grow into verbal delict.
I love him.
It will grow into verbal delict. And then again, we will have the same problems, because I remember this Václavic thing. The solutions are actually ways to create new problems.
Yes.
So
it never ends.
All Foucauldian stance on this would be, this is just a power struggle. There is a new sheriff in the town.
You're not listening.
Well, I think I am. But I'm understanding you differently.
Yes, you are. And we need more dialectical exchange.
Yes. If you promise that you will not bomb the ideas in my head, I accept.
I will not bomb them. I want them. I need them. I need those negative ideas. I can't develop without them.
How do you know that they are negative?
I need them. I need the opposite ideas. The ones that I'm experiencing.
Different. Just different.
I think we are now witnessing exactly how the practice, as opposed to the theory, unfolds. And I have a question regarding the keyword unmet needs. And in my construction of the situation, often it's not unmet needs that people may be possibly be unconscious of. It's that people refer to their experiences. Experience is something that people believe is out there in reality. For instance, it's not, I'm afraid that my way of life is going to be destroyed. It is. My way of life has already been destroyed, and this is not a need, which makes something negotiable. It is a fact. So I believe that we should be aware of this, that we're not going to ask people to negotiate about needs. We're going to ask people, what we are trying to do is to ask people to negotiate about facts. Of course, facts are constructed, but facts are real for people on a completely different plane from needs. We are asking people to put their sanity on the table and to contemplate the possibility that they may be insane. There's no way around this, because this is about facts. I mean, why male supremacy to African Americans is a fact. If you argue with that. You're basically telling that, look, I feel for you because you're insane. Try getting something good out of this.
The only thing I would say is I absolutely agree with you that we should not negotiate over needs. In fact, that's the point. The point is that we should not try to negotiate over needs. Your needs are invalid, they are inviolate. I want to meet them. When you say there is, whatever the needs are, they're not negotiable, they are meant to be met. So that's the only thing I have to say. And we don't negotiate over needs.
Just to commend what you've been saying, and in the work I've been doing the last couple of years in Northern Ireland, I probably know 30 people in my local community that were killed, and I sat across the table from people who were represent terrorist organisations in the past, and people I know who were involved deeply in terrorism, and I interviewed them, and I had to practice that piece you were talking about, whereby I kept saying to myself, what if I was born where they were born? Could I have done what they'd done? And I kept telling myself I could have, potentially. And I grew more out of that experience of sitting across the table from talking with people, asking them questions than I've ever in my entire life. And I would encourage everybody, find the person you dislike the most and spend time with them and ask them questions and feel uncomfortable inside, feel everything inside, but you will change as a person. And you don't have to agree with them. You can still disagree with their position. But once you start understanding their needs and where they come from, you will change, and you will change. The relationship will change between two people, and it's hard and it's difficult and it's not easy, but it's personal growth. It will lead to change. I've experienced it, and I'd recommend it, but it's not easy.
Just something very quickly that came to mind when you said that was about how not easy it is, and what Carmen said about the difference between theory and practice. Did you hear what I said to Dusan? I said, you're not listening. All right? You can't do that. You can't say to the other person, you're not listening. But I did, because I got excited and I got defensive. I had to say something else. I just learned from that.
I have to ask you. I am delighted with the noble proposal. I'm delighted with the noble proposal you made. I wish it were true. I wish it were more possible. I'm doing this for 30 years as a therapist. This is not very much different from psychotherapy at all.
No.
Okay.
Except there's a self. The psychotherapist has an agenda.
But you see, this is a thing which is actually being an institution of a society. Therapy relationship, possibility to go there. It is mediated through legal issues as well. So we know when and how do you go to therapists and what can you expect. But in order to set the scene for this, I wish you all the luck in the world. I'm just being pessimistic, sober, so to speak.
Unfortunately, we've got lots of bids. I'm going to say one more, because otherwise we'll get into problems of time. I think, Richard, you were next. Or last.
Just listening to Dusan there, and you I wonder if the thing is that actually this way of aiming to be with other people, which is really about actually trying to learn to love people and love the other, it's not something that's ever going to be institutionalized. It's actually something individual people do and make a commitment to in their lives, and that's all we can do. And if we ever establish a world order based on that, it will actually self-defeat itself. It's continually something we as human beings need to actually engage in. It's a bit of a Sisyphean task for us all. But actually, if we don't engage with it, we're finished as a species, a planet. It's as simple as that. That's all I want to say.
On that note.
I'm really sorry we have to stop that. I'd have liked to have gone on for a few more minutes, but I'm told that would be problematic.
Thank you very much.